Everything had already been turned off. The machines were silent. The monitor that once beeped nonstop no longer said anything. The doctors left the room. The nurses lowered their eyes. And I stayed there, sitting beside the bed, holding my son's hand, as if holding time itself. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just was. Whole. Present. Alive for him, even if he wasn't there anymore. But it was in that absolute silence that it happened. 3 minutes later, he breathed. First, a barely noticeable gasp. Then, a movement in his hand. Then, he squeezed my finger. The monitors were still turned off. But I felt it. And I am a mother. I would know even with my eyes closed. Today, he runs around the house. He shouts "Mommy" all day long. Demands cookies for breakfast and sings the wrong lyrics in the shower. But no one imagines he was once declared dead. That the hospital had already called the chaplain. That the death certificate was already signed. They had given up on him, but I hadn't, and that is why he came back. Now that everything is over, I can tell this story. But for a long time, I couldn't. Because there are pains that only silence can carry. And there are victories that are born inside death. If this story is touching you, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. Maybe you're waiting for a miracle too. And maybe it's already on its way. Before all of that, before the machines, the diagnoses, the cold words and the looks that pierced through my body as if I were invisible, I was only hope. And it hurts to remember that. Because back then, I hadn't learned yet that love can hurt too. I thought loving meant building, and I didn't know that loving could also destroy. I remember exactly the day I found out I was pregnant. I was shaking, in disbelief, holding that cheap test I bought at the pharmacy near my house. I leaned against the bathroom wall and started crying before I even understood what it meant. I didn't cry out of fear or doubt. I cried because, for the first time in my life, I felt like something chose me. Someone chose me. I had never been anyone's priority. In my family, I was always the daughter who figures it out alone. In relationships, I was always the woman who can't ask for too much. But that day, someone the size of a seed decided to stay in me, and I felt as if the whole world could fit inside my chest. The first weeks were a dream. I talked to him before feeling any movement, as if he could already hear me. I placed my hands on my belly and imagined his face. I imagined his laugh. I imagined the way he would hold my finger, really tight, the same way he would one day hold it again. Hope guided everything. I planned the future with a confidence I had never had in anything. I chose his name before telling anyone I was pregnant. I imagined the room, the clothes, the first birthday, the first steps. It was almost childish how much I believed everything would work out. But it was so beautiful to live like that. I remember something simple that became enormous later. Every night before sleeping, I'd tell him, "No matter what happens, I'll be here." I said it like a romantic, dreamy mother. I had no idea that one day I'd have to repeat those words like a battle promise. Back then, every ultrasound was like seeing the future forming right in front of me. I left every appointment smiling, full of plans, full of life. I learned to love someone I hadn't even seen yet, and loving like that, I later learned, is loving blindly and without guarantees. I thought motherhood would be a simple story: love, care, protection. But no one told me that sometimes being a mother also means fighting when everyone tells you to give up. No one warned me that being a mother also means staying on your feet when the whole world pushes you to the floor. If I had known what was coming, if I had known how strong I would have to be, maybe I would have been afraid. Maybe I would have doubted myself. But back then, before the pain, before the machines, before the moment they turned off the life support, I was only hope. And that's why it hurt so much when everything started to fall apart. Because when you love someone before you even meet them, losing that person isn't like losing someone. It's like losing your own future. And I didn't know that yet. But soon I would learn in the cruelest way. I can't tell you the exact day. There was no siren, no sudden shift, no alarm warning me that everything was about to go off the rails. It was something subtle, like an intuition that starts small and grows slowly until it becomes impossible to ignore. It began with a strange feeling, an uneasiness deep in the soul. Something told me that something was wrong with my baby, and from that moment on, hope slowly began to give space to a quiet fear. I was in the 6th month. Everything was going well, or so it seemed. The appointments were on track, the tests normal, the heartbeat strong. But there was an emptiness, a pause between movements. He always moved at night. And suddenly, he stopped. One night, then 2, then 3. At first, they told me it was normal. Baby just changed position. You're stressed, it's just your imagination. First pregnancy, everything scares you. But it wasn't just imagination. It was a real absence, as if he were screaming from the inside and no one could hear except me. I went to the hospital. I talked to the doctor. She looked at me the way someone looks when they're more worried about the time of the appointment than the life growing inside me. "Everything's fine, Mom." She said it without looking into my eyes, without hearing my racing heart, without understanding the weight of why I was there. I insisted. I asked for another ultrasound. She sighed, like someone losing patience. "First-time moms are always like this." And she smiled with one corner of her mouth, the kind of smile someone gives when teaching a child not to worry about imaginary monsters. But my monster was real, and it was growing not in my belly, but in me. It was fear. It was the certainty that something wasn't right. I went home with no answers. I spent the entire night awake, lying on my side, trying to feel a kick, a push, any sign. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The next day, I went back. Another hospital. Another doctor. This time, they did a quick ultrasound. Silence in the room. Machine noises. Eyes avoiding mine. "We'll monitor you for a few hours, just as a precaution." I was admitted. The first night was hell. The lights never went off. The monitors beeped non-stop. Other mothers cried in the hallways. And I pretended everything was fine, even while my heart was screaming. In the middle of the night, a nurse walked in. She was different. She looked me in the eyes. She asked how I was truly. "I'm scared," I answered. For the first time, without trying to look strong, she held my hand and said, "Trust what you feel. Mothers know." That sentence haunted me, because I did know. I knew something was wrong. And still, no one listened. In the days that followed, the tests began to change. The doctor's expressions became more serious. Conversations began to happen outside the room. I heard whispers. "The baby isn't responding as expected." there was a deceleration. It could be that, but no one told me the truth. I was always the last to know. Or maybe the first to feel. There was a moment when I clearly heard, "Better not say anything yet, she's too emotional." As if being emotional were a flaw. As if feeling fear were weakness. As if not trusting blindly were hysteria. But I kept going. I kept talking to him, playing the songs he seemed to like, placing my hands on my belly and saying, "Stay here, Mommy is with you." Except he was fading, little by little, and no one seemed willing to do anything. That's when I understood. If I didn't fight for him, no one would. And I started preparing myself to fight the system, to fight the silence of the doctors, to fight even the impossible. Because something was starting to go wrong, and I could feel this was only the beginning. The first doctor who treated me in that hospital, I will never forget his face. Not because he was kind, nor because he offered me hope, but because in that look, cold, vague, distant, I realized my fear would not be taken seriously. He was a man in a white coat, tired expression, eyes of someone who has seen too much, and therefore stopped caring. He walked into the room without saying good morning, skimmed through my chart, and without lifting his head asked, "What exactly is bothering you?" The word bothering locked something inside me. I wasn't bothered. I was terrified. But even so, I took a deep breath and said, "I can't feel my baby. For days, something is wrong." He dropped the clipboard on the table with a light thud and looked at me for the first time. But it wasn't a look that sees. It was the kind that passes through you, that doesn't recognize you as a human being, let alone a desperate mother. Previous tests are normal. Could be position, could be stress. You just need to rest. I wanted to scream. But scream to whom? To a system that had already decided I was just another number? "I need you to check now. Do an ultrasound, please." He smiled slightly, a smile that scared me more than any word could. "Calm down, Mom. We'll monitor soon. Don't worry before you have to." And he walked out. I stayed there, alone, in a plastic chair, with the sound of a clock ticking, mocking my urgency. Every passing second was 1 second less. And no one seemed to understand that. They did the ultrasound 2 hours later. 2 technicians, a grayish screen, cold gel on my belly, and silence. Absolute silence. "Is everything okay?" I asked. The technician avoided my eyes. "The doctor will call you in a moment." I walked out of the room shaking. I sat in the hallway. I watched parents holding their newborns in their arms. One crying, another smiling, flowers being delivered, congratulations, messages, and there I was, in that endless wait, feeling a life fading inside me in silence. The doctor arrived an hour later. Serious, fast. She said the baby was showing signs of bradycardia, a heartbeat slower than normal. But according to her, it was not alarming yet. "We'll keep you under observation. You may go home, rest, and return in 48 hours. That was the moment I stood up, for the first time. And I said, "No, I'm not going home. He's dying and you know it. I can feel it." The doctor crossed her arms. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but no, you don't understand. You're not feeling him stop living inside you." "I am," she sighed, exhausted. "We can admit you then, just as a precaution." Just as a precaution. That's how the worst week of my life began. Hospitalization was a pause in the routine of pain, but it brought no answers. No listening. They ran tests. They switched rooms. They changed nurses. And nothing changed in the doctor's eyes. A mix of impatience and disdain. As if I were part of the problem. They treated the monitors as absolute truth, and my desperation as hysteria. But my son was there. Still, weak, too quiet. Until one night, the nurse who always smiled at me didn't smile. She walked in, looked at the monitor, and simply said, "I'm going to call the on-call doctor." The doctor rushed in. The room filled with people. Medical terms started flying in the air. Hypoxia, fetal distress, immediate intervention. They told me to sign papers. They told me they would do everything they could. But I already knew. I knew the moment had come, and that if it depended on them, I would never hear that heart beating again. The operating room was cold, colder than any place I had ever been. But it wasn't the temperature that froze me on the inside, it was fear. Paralyzing, absolute, suffocating fear. They placed me in a chair next to the door while they prepared everything. I signed more papers. They said they would perform an emergency C-section. They used words like viability, neurological compromise, guarded prognosis. But no one, absolutely no one, looked me in the eyes when they spoke. Maybe because they already knew what they were about to take from me. When they laid me on the operating table, the light above me seemed to mock me. Those round, bright, cold lamps, they looked like eyes judging my desperation. The silence was broken only by technical, professional voices talking about my son as if he were no longer there. But he was. I felt him. I felt that he was still fighting, even if he was fighting alone. The surgery began. I don't remember the physical pain. I don't remember the anesthesia. I don't remember time. I only remember waiting for a cry that never came. The silence in that moment was the worst pain I have ever felt. Much worse than any incision. Because every mother knows that when the baby is born, he cries. It is the sound that saves you. The sound that says, "He's here, he's alive, he arrived." But there was no cry. There was rushing. There were urgent voices. There was the sentence that broke me. "He's not responding. Call the support team." I wanted to get up, to scream, to run to the table, but my body wouldn't obey me. My heart had already shattered. Minutes later, I saw one of the doctors shake his head in defeat. Another whispered something to the nurse. They stepped away. And then they told me he was in critical condition, that he would be taken immediately to the neonatal ICU, that they would do everything possible, but that I needed to prepare myself. Prepare myself? How does a mother prepare to lose the child she carried inside her? They left me alone in a recovery room. Alone. No explanations. No faces. No names. As if I were just a statistic. Hours later, still drugged and unable to walk, I asked to see him. They said it wasn't possible, that he was intubated, that the team was doing what they could. Is he alive? It was the only question I managed to ask. The nurse hesitated, then answered, "For now, yes." That sentence stayed stuck inside me. For now, as if at any moment I could lose everything. That night I had a fever. I had chills, but the pain wasn't physical. It was absence. The next day, they finally agreed to take me to him in a wheelchair. When I entered the ICU, my heart stopped. My son, covered in wires, tubes, machines, so small, so fragile, and still so mine. I held his hand, and I swore, "I won't let you go." The days that followed were the darkest of my life. Doctors came in, one by one, repeating the same sentence, each in different words. There is no more brain activity. He is only alive with artificial support. We recommend discontinuing life support. As if it were easy, as if it weren't my heart lying there. I begged. I asked for more time. I asked for another opinion. I asked for a chance. But they insisted. There was nothing to be done. The last doctor who spoke to me was direct. The longer you postpone this, the more traumatic the outcome will be. As if I were delaying the inevitable. As if continuing to believe was selfish. They gave me 2 days to decide. 2 days. I spent every second beside him, singing softly, telling him about the stories we would never live, telling him how loved he was. And on the last day, I knelt and said, "If you're still in there, give me a sign, any sign." But nothing came, only silence, only the sound of machines. And then, with swollen eyes and a body without strength, I said yes. Yes, you can turn everything off. That was the moment everything went dark. That was when a part of me died too. And even so, I stayed beside him, even after they turned everything off. Because no matter how much the whole world had given up, I still hadn't said goodbye. I thought the worst had already happened when I signed the authorization to turn off the machines. But I was wrong. The worst came later when I realized that deep down, no one there believed my son was alive. To them, he was a concluded case. To me, he was everything. The doctors walked into the room with calculated steps, cold, professional, far too professional for something so human. They spoke softly among themselves, as if they were closing a report. In that moment, I felt myself stop being a mother and turn back into a patient. He stopped being a baby and became a statistic. "We'll begin," one of them said, emotionless. The lights in the room were bright, aggressive. The beeping of the machines echoed in my head like a countdown. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg for more time. I wanted to grab my son's body and run out of there. But I was paralyzed, trapped between shock and despair. One of the nurses approached and asked, in the most neutral voice in the world, "Will you remain in the room during the procedure?" Of course I would. I was the mother, and mothers do not abandon their children, not even when they are told to. I nodded, even trembling, even with every part of my body begging to flee. I had to stay. They surrounded the bed, adjusted wires, buttons, tubes, and then the most terrifying sound in the world happened. Silence. The monitor stopped. The machine stopped. Life stopped. No one cried. No one apologized. No one expressed sorrow. They simply turned off the machines and began to step away, as if they had just turned off a light. Nothing more. It didn't sink in immediately. I stayed there, frozen, hearing the echo of their footsteps leaving the room, the sound of the door opening, then closing, and then I was alone with him. And that's when I understood. They had given up, but I was still there. I walked to the bed, held his hand. His skin was cold. His lips were pale, but it was him. It was still him. I leaned my forehead against his and cried like I had never cried before. I cried with my whole heart, with my whole soul. And between sobs I said, "I didn't give up on you. I'm here." The nurses stood at the door, watching from a distance, waiting for the protocol time to remove the body. One of them wiped a tear, but said nothing. No one approached me. No one hugged me. No one offered anything. I was living the worst moment of my entire life. and I had to live it alone. Seconds, minutes, hours, time stopped meaning anything. All I could do was repeat, "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." I started singing to him, a song I used to play on my phone when he was still in my belly, the same song that always made him move. My voice trembled so much it barely came out, but I sang until I had no tears left, until I had no strength left. And when I thought there was nothing left to give, I still gave love. They had given up. Medicine had given up. Logic had given up. But I hadn't. I stayed. I remained. I fought even when there was no fight left to fight. And it was at that exact moment when I was shattered, defeated, empty that something happened. Something so small it could have been ignored. Something so fragile it could have been dismissed as a reflex. But I felt it. In the middle of my pain, in the absolute silence of that room, his hand moved. It wasn't a reflex. I know. A mother knows. And in that instant, I discovered that even when everything ends, love can still bring life back. I can't describe what those 3 minutes were. There is no word that captures the mix of despair and faith that filled that room. It was as if the whole world had stopped, and only I remained alive, resisting, begging for a breath, for a sign. I kept holding his hand. I pressed my face against my son's cold skin and whispered every memory we had together, even if almost none of them had been lived outside my womb. But I knew who he was. I knew him the way only a mother knows. I refused to let him go. I refused to accept it's over. I refused to believe that a decision, a protocol, a clinical sentence could be stronger than what I felt. That was the first time in my life I experienced what it means to have faith without proof, without guarantees, without support, because I was alone, with my son dead, or so they said. And still, there was something inside me repeating like a silent mantra, "He's still here." 3 minutes. In that time, no doctor returned. No machine sound filled the room again. Life had withdrawn from that place, and all that was left was my presence. I pressed my lips to his forehead. It was cold, but love warms what no one else can. I kept speaking. Simple things. The same things I used to say every night when I was still pregnant. "Mommy is here. I'm here, my love. I didn't leave. I will never leave." And it was there, in the middle of that farewell, I refused to accept that it happened. A breath. Weak. Soft. Almost impossible to notice. But it was real. I lifted my face immediately, thinking it was my imagination. That grief was playing tricks on me. But then, his hand moved, and it wasn't just any spasm. It was a conscious movement. Delicate. Alive. My heart stopped for a second. Then it raced like never before. My throat locked. My legs weakened. But my soul, it screamed. He moved, he moved. The nurses ran. The room, once silent, turned into a storm. "Call the doctor." Monitors. Reactivation. Within seconds, they were all there. The same doctor who signed the authorization to turn everything off came back pale, as if he had seen a ghost. They reconnected the machines, placed oxygen, started shouting technical commands, and I stood there, frozen in the middle of the chaos, crying quietly, holding my chest, which suddenly felt too small for so much feeling. One of the doctors looked at me and said, "Mom, he came back. He's coming back." I fell to my knees, not from weakness, but because no body can stand that much light after so much time in the dark. It was as if the world had taken a step back and returned what was mine. In the minutes that followed, science took control. Medication, tests, monitoring, but none of that mattered to me, because I knew. He was with me. He had never left. He had simply waited for me not to give up, and I didn't give up. Little by little, the vital signs returned. The monitor started beeping again. The heart started beating weak but steady. His skin regained color. And while everyone else worked to save the body, I thanked the universe for listening to the soul. That was the night death stepped back. Not because of a medical miracle, not because of luck, but because a mother's love chose to stay. 3 minutes, 3 eternities, 3 doors that almost closed forever. But he came back, and I came back with him. That morning, when the sunlight crossed the ICU window and gently touched my son's face, I understood that everything had changed. For him, for me, for the whole world that without knowing almost lost one of the brightest souls I've ever known. He was lying there, still fragile, still surrounded by wires and tubes. But now, there was life, breathing, heartbeat, presence. His skin was no longer so pale. His fingers, once completely still, now twitched with tiny movements as if recognizing the world around him. And his eyes, still closed, but with eyelids trembling like someone trying to wake from a nightmare. The medical team, who once looked at me as a hysterical woman, now watched me with silent respect. No one dared to apologize, but it wasn't necessary. I could see it in their eyes: surprise, embarrassment, restrained admiration. They knew what they had done. They knew what they had almost given up on. And, in a way, I believe everyone there learned something that morning. About limits. About what science can explain and about what it will never be able to. The following days were full of vigilance, but also of small daily miracles. He began to react, to respond to stimuli, to open his eyes, to recognize my voice. The first time he squeezed my finger with real strength, I broke down. And the first word that left his lips, weak and sweet, was, "Mom." In that moment, I knew. Everything had been worth it. Every pain, every fear, every battle, the insistence, the loneliness, the silent scream I carried inside my chest for days. None of it was in vain. But even with all the joy, something in me had changed forever. I was no longer the same woman who walked into that hospital weeks before. I was no longer just a mother in gestation. I became a mother in war. A mother who doesn't bow. A mother who feels, who listens, who stays even when no one else believes. And with that came the painful truth. They didn't save my son. They gave up on him. It was love that brought him back. It was the invisible bond between the two of us that crossed through the darkness and pulled him back into the light. I don't know if anyone will ever believe this story. Many will say it was coincidence. Some will say it was luck. A few will call it a miracle. But I know what I lived. And he knows too. Because every time he looks into my eyes, I see a whole world inside them. A world he visited and chose to return from. Today, he plays in the backyard, asks too many questions, falls asleep wrapped around my neck as if he knows he almost didn't get the chance to. And sometimes in the silence of the night he asks me, "Mom, did I die?" And I answer, "No, my love." I was never the same again. Because now I know that life is not measured in years, days, or hours, but in seconds, in 3 minutes. 3 minutes that gave me back what nothing and no one will ever take away from me. Today, when I watch him running around the house, laughing loudly, tripping over toys and calling my name every 5 minutes, I catch myself thinking, how many other mothers didn't get a second chance? How many stories like mine ended 3 minutes earlier? 3 minutes. That was the time between their giving up and his return. 3 minutes that separated grief from life. The end from a new beginning, pain from hope. And the cruelest part is knowing that if I had obeyed, If I had walked out of that room and left his body there, the way they asked, if I had trusted the protocols more than my own instinct, my son wouldn't be here. This story wouldn't exist. And I might not have had a reason to go on. Today, I understand that being a mother goes far beyond giving birth. Being a mother is staying when everything collapses. It's confronting doctors, reports, statistics. It's saying no when everyone else says yes. It's screaming even when your voice is breaking. It's believing when everyone else has already given up. And that's why I decided to tell this. Not to praise myself, not to inspire, but to remind you, the one listening, watching, maybe crying right now, that your voice matters, your instinct matters. And that love, when it's real, goes where nothing and no one else can. Maybe you're living your own 3 minutes right now. Maybe you're on the edge of giving up. Maybe everyone has already turned their back on you. But I'm here to tell you, stay a little longer. Because sometimes, all life needs is someone who refuses to walk away. If this story touched you, comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Maybe today you need hope. Maybe this story is the sign you were waiting for.